Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon dan selamat siang buat Bapak Ibu yang telah bergabung pada acara kita siang hari ini. Welcome to the Energy Transition Sharing Session on episode 4 with the topic of making coal transition visible, insights on how to early retire coal-fired power plants and its context in Indonesia. This webinar today is a collaboration between Institute for Essential Services Reform and Carbon Record Initiative based in the UK or United Kingdom, England. Before we're going to start and jump into the main discussion for today, allow me to give a little bit of a fresh reminder on the housekeeping rules. I believe that you've been joining in so many webinar Zoom, so thank you very much for participating from wherever you are and also from our viewers on the YouTube. Just a kind reminder that in the end of the day, we're going to have a question and answer session after the panelists and all the speakers have presented. If you have any further questions that you would like to ask to our panelists and to our speakers, for you who are joining through the Zoom application, please kindly use the Q&A box session please be specified on to who that you want to address your question on. Later on, our moderator is going to moderating, and we would love to answer as much as possible questions. But if your question haven't been raised, probably our presenters and our panelists are going to answer it directly through the chat room. For you, if you're joining through our YouTube channel, you can also participate by typing on your question on the live chat box, and one of our my colleague in here are going to be addressing your question and giving all to the panelists as well. And hopefully we can also address your question in the end of the day. And before we're gonna go into the jump session, I have shared you all the link of the polling. I'm going to run a little bit of a polling related into this topic. If you can go to the link that has been provided in the chat box, you can just click it, and I'm going to start the polling right now. As well as if you're joining through the YouTube, I believe that my colleague Nisa is also have shared it to you on the polling. So I'm going to start. We have a few questions to go. Sorry. So cool. I'm sure that you have, if you have a look already on your screen, if you go through the link that have been provided, there is question number 1 on the polling. Number 1, to what extent you agree to the narrative of coal as the cheapest way to power the Indonesian economy? Whether you strongly agree, you agree, disagree, strongly disagree. I'm gonna let few moments until everybody can join. Again, for all the participants that you just joining in, welcome. But we are running a polling right now. The link of the polling that you can joining through the link that I've been sharing in the chat box below. So please be sure that you are participating. Great. I'm going to move forward to the next question. The question number 2, based on your expertise, knowledge, or educated guess, which statement do you most agree of? There is 3 statements in here: whether the existing Indonesian coal-fired power plants are relatively still competitive to operate in the next 1 decade ahead, whether the coal-fired power plants are in the tipping point to compete with renewables in the next decade, or option number 3, the existing Indonesian coal-fired power plants are already becoming potentially stranded assets in the next decade. I'm going to give you some more minutes to read the questions and also starting the polling. Great. I'm gonna continue to the next question. Thank you. Question number 3, based on the expertise or your knowledge and educated guess, which statement do you most agree from the 2 statements below? The total cost of phasing out the Indonesian non-competitive coal fleets is already affordable and will continue to shrink, or the total cost of phasing out the Indonesian non-competitive coal fleets is still expensive and costly. We have 2 more questions to go, and I'm going to continue with question number 4. What is the most low-hanging fruit financial instruments to make coal to clean transition feasible and just in Indonesia? Is it introducing the carbon price policy? Is it a subsidy reallocation to incentivize clean energy development? Or all the options above are arguably easy to deploy? Perfect. So we're going to the last questions of the polling of the day. The last question would be, which institution is arguably can play as the first mover in exploring and implementing the financial instrument to make Indonesia's coal transition feasible? Was it private banks? Is it multilateral or multinational development banks? Or do you think it's supposed to be development finance institutions? Cool. I'm going to give you 1 more minute until we're going to wrap it up. This is the last question of the polling. In the end of the day, I'm going to share the link of the results that all the people can access the result of the polling later on. So great. So thank you. I'm going to stop the polling right now. Again, I'm going to share you the link so everybody can access on the result of what else, what are the everybody's space about the polling today. Okay, without any further ado, so we're going through the main session of today on the webinar. Again, welcome to everybody who's just joining in. We're just about to start. Today's host or the moderator for the event will be Erina Mursanti, the Program Manager of Green Economy from the ISR. Erina, the platform is yours, please.
All right, thank you, Ganda, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon in Jakarta time. Thank you also for participants joining us from YouTube and also from the Zoom platform. Thank you also for the speakers and the panelists who have kindly allocated your valuable time to join this webinar and have joined virtually from your place. My name is Erina Mursanti. I'm from Institute for Essential Service Reform, ISR. Basically, this webinar would like to launch the report just released by Rocky Mountain Institute, Sierra Club, and Carbon Tracker Initiative on last June. The report title is How to Retire Early, Making Accelerated Coal Phase Out Feasible and Just. And ISR would like to bring up the discussion about coal transition in Indonesia. So we think the policymakers, the financial sectors, and also the private sector who will be affected by coal transition needs to hear about this and discuss this in preparing the coal transition in Indonesia. All right, I will host this webinar today. The title of the webinar itself is Making Coal Transition Feasible, Insights on How to Early Retire Coal-Fired Power Plants and its Context in Indonesia. This webinar is presented by Institutes for Essential Service Reform, or ISR, in cooperation with Carbon Tracker Initiative. ISR is a think tank organization who has a specialization in energy and environment issues based in Jakarta, Indonesia. Well, Carbon Tracker Initiative is a financial think tank that focuses in impact of energy transition on capital market based in London, UK. In this webinar, we would like to find out how coal transition is possible to be happened in Indonesia. This is really interesting because coal transition discussion in Indonesia is more and more emerging, more and more trending because more people are pushing government and also pushing the private sectors to do coal transition. But at the other side, government has to think about the electricity supplies also. So coal transition globally is inevitable. One thing for sure, market pressure will push Indonesia to prepare coal transition, and Indonesia cannot run away from this reality because it's already ongoing in the global, and Indonesia also have to do coal transition. So it's much better if the government of Indonesia can prepare the coal transition comprehensively. So the coal transition is expected to be fair to social, economy, and also environment. Today, in this webinar, we have two speakers. One is Mr. Fabi Tumiwa, the Executive Director of IESR. Mr. Fabi has been working extensively on energy and climate change issues for more than 20 years. And another one we have here already, Mr. Matthew Gray, the Managing Director of Carbon Tracker Initiative. Mr. Matt is a carbon and energy expert with experience in Europe and Australasia and leads Carbon Tracker's work on power and utilities. After two speakers deliver their presentation, I would like to ask two panelists to deliver their comments and or their feedbacks based on their own skills and their expertise about what the speakers have presented before. We have here already two panelists, Mr. Husni Safruddin, Deputy Director of Electricity Program Development from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Mr. Husni has been dealt with electricity issue in DG of Electricity for the last 4 years, I guess. That's as I know, but sorry if I mistake, but at least I know Mr. Husni for the last 4 years. He has been experienced from financing issue to the implementation issue of the electricity development program in Indonesia. And one more panelist is Mr. Arthur Simatupang. Mr. Arthur is chairman of Indonesian Private Electricity Producers Association, or APLSE in Indonesia. And Mr. Arthur has a vast experience in coal industry, from coal mining to coal IPP throughout his professional working experience. So hosting this webinar will, I guess, will be a tough job because we have really high-level speakers and panelists here. Okay, before we start with the discussion, I would like to inform that for participants who would like to ask questions, just please type it in the Q&A box, and I will let speakers and panelists to answer it live or typing the answer in Q&A box. I will let panelists and speakers to answer it live later on the Q&A session. Now we start. Now it's time to listen to Mr. Fabi's presentation. Mr. Fabi will present about. Mr. Fabi will give the Indonesian context of the necessity of coal transition from several participants. So, Mr. Fabi, you have 15 minutes from now. Time is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Erina, and good afternoon to all of you. Distinguished speakers and participants to our webinar today, and thank you for joining us. This topic, it's kind of hard to discuss in Indonesia, and as we know that coal is very much centered in our energy policy. and discussing about transition from coal to renewable energy based system. It's not just difficult from the political economic perspective, but there is a lot of skeptical from the power planning perspective. Most of our policymaker and power planner believe that coal play a central role, and as it serves as baseload power, therefore it couldn't be simply replaced by renewables. There's a lot of ongoing discussion currently whether that argument is still valid in this as technology evolve and develop. But surely that that will be another topic to discuss. But let me give you kind of the situation in Indonesia on the context of the coal transition. Coal become very is important resources is in Indonesia because it's become a main commodity. It is a trading commodity for export and source of revenue, both at national and subnational levels, and it contribute to our tax, local revenue like provincial revenue like East Kalimantan, where most of the coal are now producing. Coal can contribute around 30% of the local revenues. Local government revenue, so it's quite pretty high. It's not only that, it's also become the energy sources for power generation. Right now, it's seen as the cheapest among other fossil fuel generation. And if we see our national energy policy, it is stated that the government tends to exploit and use more coal to fulfill our energy demand. And that's actually the question, whether that kind of assumption that made like a decade ago is still valid. As we know that globally, the energy transition is ongoing in number of countries, and it will both because of the technology as well as the climate pressure. And from the climate change perspective, to meet the Paris Agreement target, it has to be a rapid decarbonization of the energy system. And one of the key sectors that need to be decarbonized rapidly in the next 2 decades is actually power sectors. So we have seen this a trend ongoing in the last 10 years in many countries, and for sure that it has some implication. The energy transition trend has some implication. At least we can see from Indonesia that currently is the coal producing country, as well as one of the coal main coal users. So it affects both on domestic demand and export demand. We know that right now the global energy transition is happening due to the fast declining price of renewables, in particular solar and wind. And a new data shows that the global coal fleet actually has been declining since 2018 globally. And that's particularly outside China. And the net coal power plant capacity already right now in the first half of 2020, so the first semester of 2020 is actually decreased by 2.9 gigawatts. So this is actually the first time. Given that the bulk coal demand is coming from power sector, the decline in coal power capacity would inevitably lead to the reduction in coal use. And we can see that in the number of countries that become the target for coal export, of Indonesia is actually having the energy transition in their power sector as well. So we know that 60% of our coal export actually goes to China and India, and the other 40% goes to the other country in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And if we look at this country, look at India and China, for instance, they also a coal-rich country, and they intend to produce their domestic coal as much as possible. That will increase the pressure of the coal import in the near future. At the same time, we have seen that in the last 5 years, the coal demand rising is almost double. And 70% of our domestic coal demand is actually for power generation. As we witnessed that the coal capacity also increased because of the number of government program in the past. We have FTP, Fast Track Program 1, Fast Track Program 2, and the 35 gigawatt power plant that is still ongoing right now, that by the end of 2030, it will be double than the current level. So the coal capacity is expected to be double in the current from the current level. And we export heavily to as I mentioned, to the India and China, and it's very interesting that to see, and we always believe that the export market will always there. Yeah, but it's actually, we have to be cautious with this assumption, and because of is obviously is not only in Indonesia that is willing to sell its coal, turn the resource into the export commodity, but currently we also see that in the international coal market, the competition is actually quite heavy, and as a number of regions right now has stated to phase out coal, so the focus of the market right now of coal market is actually focused on Asia, where we still build more coal than the other region. So even the country like Russia increased the coal export. Country like Colombia also would like to sell their coal to the region. South Africa also sell the coal to. So there is enormous competition in this region on the coal market. Yeah, and Indonesia is heavily export to China, but very interesting is situation in China is currently is happening as China already has reached grid parity for solar, and we can see from the latest study, I think that published last year, that actually the electricity price from a solar quite competitive, even lower, even cheaper than the electricity price from the utilities. So as the solar electricity become cheaper, so it is logic to say that customer of utility soon will move to acquire the electricity or to generate the electricity from solar instead of buying from the utilities. And we know from the number of data showing that actually a coal power plant in China already not competitive. I think Matt can explain that later. From their study show that I think almost half of the coal power plant in China actually loss making instead of profit making. And this is the situations, and that it was like 2 years ago, and we will see that the situation it will get worse for coal in China. So in the near future, we have to anticipate that our coal export to China also will be reduced, and we have seen that in actually in this year as the pandemic came. We have the pandemic and the demand of the electricity in China decline. So does the coal export to China. And in Indonesia itself, we can see that, and this is as renewable become competitive. I think this is, I cited this from Carbon Tracker report in 2018, showing that by 2030, actually 70% of Indonesia coal power plant will be more expensive compared to the new renewables. So building new renewables is cheaper than running as existing coal plants in starting in 2029. Yeah, and that's actually the tipping point. And if we, it means that if we keep running the less competitive coal-fired power plant, we have to bear the cost. And that's something, because the alternative is actually cheaper than the existing one. So that's the situation. So what is the implication if now in the future that the domestic demand for coal is actually declined? So we can assume that a decade from now, if our export is declined and if the domestic consumption also decline because coal is no longer competitive in the power system, so the domestic demand also will decline, and that's something logically the coal production also will decline. And we know that it has to be anticipated because right now the 4 provinces in Indonesia where 85% of our coal are produced is actually has to transform their or diversify their economy to deal with this decline. And I think one of the is Kalimantan Timur, Kalimantan Selatan, Kalimantan Tengah, dan Sumatera Selatan. Yeah. So there is a threat to actually the province that heavily rely on coal productions. In Indonesia itself, that as we have signed Paris Agreement, then from the projection, the energy sector will be the largest source of emission, and currently with the emission reduction target is still far from compatible with the Paris Agreement target. So again, I think the challenge is now whether we can increase that ambition, and power sectors is play very important role in the reducing the emissions, and based on our study that we launched also last year, there should be an effort actually to reduce current coal capacity from now on until 2000 and before 2040 if we want to meet the Paris Agreement target, the temperature target 2 and 1.5 degrees. And this is the kind of the scenario based on this target. Basically, we have to phase out, if we want to meet the 1.5 degree target, so we have to phase out the entire coal fleet before 2050. And that's actually create, the question is how we are going to do that, because Most of the Indonesia, 60% of Indonesia coal-fired power plant is actually now is still 10 years old. So it means that they still have 20 to 30 years of economic lifetime. And if you would like to retire them earlier because of the both climate pressure as well as non-competitive, how we are going to do that? I think that's the question that will be answered by Matt later on. But ISR has suggested a number of steps to be taken. Of course, for us, it is important to ensure that we have enough supply to meet our electricity demand in the future. Therefore, a rapid deployment of renewable energy is very, very important, and scheduling the retirements of coal power plant. As early this year, Minister of Energy also has announced that to replace, I think, around 13 gigawatt of thermal capacity that coal, gas, and diesel plant to with renewables. I think that's also kind of the strategy. But very important also to address, since we are still building coal-fired power plant now until the end of this decade, our recommendation that we have to look at this, whether they're still competitive, whether they're still cost effective compared to the other type of power plant, in this case, renewable. So I will end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Excellent. You can present for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes. Normally, you need more than 15 minutes to present some important things. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fabi. I just want to clarify one thing from what you have presented before. You mentioned that regional economy regeneration is one key important one key solution to make a coal transition happen in Indonesia. So based on your knowledge, how Indonesia's government prepare the alternative of coal-reliant economy in 4 coal provinces?
Well, I think in terms of coal production, we have seen that a few years ago when the coal price declined, we know that a number of coal production province actually have some economic difficulties. So their economic growing lower, and that affect to the entire sector as well. So if coal production decline, then in that particular province, other sector will be affected. Transport sectors, real estate, consumption, all of that. And I think it shows that in coal region, coal producing region, they coal play important roles. Yeah, we haven't heard so far about the strategy to, if let's say the coal sector declined, and I think that's still a big task to government to come up with a plan. And as ISR also always offer that we would be very happy to partner with the government to design a strategy on how to address this issue. But I think we shouldn't. Our warning is that will come soon than later. It will come sooner than later. So we don't really have much time, and we have a number of projection also stated that the Indonesian coal export could be 20-25% lower than today in the next 3 or 4 years. So I think, and we have seen that during the pandemic, yeah. And I think we need, as now there is very uncertain about the global economy, and also in the Asia is one of the badly hit region. So I think that kind of plan needs to be fostered. The anticipation of transitioning the local economy, I think, is very, very important. I mean, to prepare.
Okay, thank
Thank you.
you, Fabi. It's really interesting explanation that that actually it is time now to start thinking about the coal transition in Indonesia because it really because the economic crisis and due to COVID-19, so it's actually it's time now despite COVID-19 crisis. So I will let Mr. Matt from Carbon Tracker to present insightful analysis on how to retire coal power plants early from the financial perspective specifically. Matt, you have 15 minutes from now. Please, time is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Arena. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're dialing in from Europe. Just turning on my video so you can see me. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'll explain very briefly who we are. Carbon Tracker is a financial think tank from London, and we sort of uniquely placed to talk about energy transition because we tend to focus on the financial and economic implications of the transition. Then I'll talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a profound impact not only on the power generation mix and power demand, but also on the economics of the transition, and we believe the speed of the transition as well. And then I'll spend some time talking about the new study that we have produced with our colleagues at the Rocky Mountain Institute and Sierra Club, which are US think tanks. So just to explain briefly, Carbon Tracker is a philanthropically funded think tank based in the United Kingdom. We were set up in 2012 to advise and influence the financial markets with regards to the risks and opportunities associated with the energy transition. We principally produce research that we then distribute to investors so they can identify the risks and opportunities associated with the highest carbon and, we believe, in the future, the highest cost fossil fuel assets. And then we take that research and we help investors engage with companies, financial market regulators, and also policymakers, which is crucially important in the context of the power sector, because the power sector is predominantly influenced by governments. Based on the analysis that we have done, around 90% of all coal-fired power in operation today is in a semi-regulated or regulated power market. So just to get started, this gives you some context of the activity of coal-fired power in the major Southeast Asian markets. So the four major markets: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And as you can see, the biggest operating coal fleet is in Indonesia, and also Indonesia plans to build a considerable amount of coal in the future as well, and so do a number of other countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines. So with regards to COVID, what we have found with the impact COVID has had is it's really threefold. We firstly think that COVID has the potential to accelerate the energy transition from high carbon sources of power generation to lower carbon sources of power generation. This is analysis from the International Energy Agency earlier this year, looking at the projected change in primary energy demand by power generation technology in 2020 relative to 2019. And what the International Energy Agency is projecting is that all the major conventional sources of power generation are expected to decline significantly this year. So coal, gas, nuclear, and oil are expected to decline significantly. And the only generation technologies that are expected to increase are renewables. And within renewables, that is principally wind and solar photovoltaics. And what that means also is that energy demand is going to shrink significantly this year. Again, according to the International Energy Agency, they reckon total energy demand will decline 6% year on year. And because of this, we believe that it has the potential to accelerate the energy transition because within the decline in demand, we are seeing renewable energy expand, which means the power generation mix will be decarbonizing quicker than would have occurred in the absence of the COVID crisis. And this chart here follows on from some of the comments that Fabi made with regards to power generation economics and comparing coal-fired power, both new forms of coal-fired power and operating coal-fired power with some of the other power generation technologies that we study at Carbon Tracker. So I'll focus on coal-fired power first. So coal-fired power can be seen in the bold red line, which is coal with carbon capture and storage technologies attached to the coal unit. The bold black line is coal-fired power, and the dotted black line is the operating cost of coal-fired power. So the bold lines represent the levelized cost, or the total cost to installing and operating these technologies over their project lifetime. And the new coal-fired technologies we've included here are based on a 2019 estimate, and they include, they assume an ultra supercritical coal-fired unit, which is one of the highest efficient, most efficient coal-fired technologies. And as a consequence is also the most expensive as well. But what that shows is that if the Indonesian government wants to install coal with carbon capture and storage, then it will require a very significant premium. We believe that the levelized cost of coal plus carbon capture and storage will potentially cost over $150 per megawatt hour. And that's on a levelized cost basis. But even installing a ultra supercritical coal-fired power plant without carbon capture and storage, again, is relatively expensive, $100 per megawatt hour, based on the analysis that we have done. And what we do with those estimates of the cost of new and existing coal-fired power is we compare that with the levelized cost of solar and onshore wind. So the green bold line is solar plus 4 hours of battery storage. The yellow line is just solar without any storage, and the blue line is onshore wind, again without any battery storage or battery backup. And what we see based on the analysis that we have done is we see a big deflationary trend in both solar photovoltaics, battery storage, and wind. And the reason we see this deflationary trend is there's a mega trend happening throughout the world in all major power markets, and that is governments and investors looking to support and invest in principally solar, photovoltaics, and onshore wind, and increasingly coupling those technologies with battery storage. And what that means with all this investment and support for these technologies is we expect there to be significant economies of scale, and therefore we expect the cost of these technologies to continue to decline into the future. And again, this deflationary trend that we're expecting is based on historical evidence as well. So solar, for instance, has reduced about 80% since 2010, wind about 60%, battery storage about 90% since 2010. So these deflationary trends that we are forecasting are based on some observations that we have seen over the last 10 years. And what this means, of course, is that we believe new investments in coal-fired power are high cost today, based in the Indonesian context. So we would encourage the government and therefore investors to think very carefully whether they want to build new coal-fired power, because even today we believe that it is a high-cost option. And what we would also say is that in the not too distant future, there will become a point in time where the cost of low carbon alternatives will actually be less than the cost of operating coal-fired power. So that the dotted black line there is what we believe to be the operating cost of Indonesia's coal fleet, and that is based on an asset level or boiler level analysis that we have done. And as you can see, by the mid 2020s, we expect solar without storage to become cheaper than operating coal. That in itself is a profound implication. But what is more interesting is by 2027, we expect solar plus 4 hours of battery storage to actually outcompete the operating cost of Indonesia's coal-fired power plants. And that is particularly significant because it will mean, with that storage component, it will mean that that solar capacity is dispatchable. Only 4 hours, of course, and it is important to take into consideration that Indonesia, because of its economy, does rely heavily on baseload power. That will likely change over time, but at the moment it does rely on baseload power because of the power mix that it has, and because of the manufacturing base that baseload capacity supports. But as we see these technologies coupled with battery storage, and not only battery storage, but other flexible sources of electricity such as gas, pumped hydro, and potentially biomass, we will see the potential for a combination of variable renewable energy coupled with these dispatchable sources of electricity outcompeting coal-fired power. And what I would say is we've seen some positive moves by the Indonesian government to replace old coal-fired power with lower cost and lower carbon alternatives. So as Fabi mentioned in his presentation earlier this year, the Indonesian government said it was going to replace its power generation capacity that was older than 20 years with renewable energy. And the table on the left there shows the coal-fired power plants in Indonesia that are older than 20 years. And as you can see, there's some very big units there in terms of nameplate capacity, but also you can see that the owners of these units are not only PLN, which is the state-owned utility. There are some units that are owned by private operators as well, most notably Engie, which is a French utility. And what we would say with regards to this announcement that the government has made is we would applaud it, because we believe that if the government does go through with this policy, it will likely result in lower electricity prices for the Indonesian consumer, which is obviously crucially important given the development priorities that the Indonesian government has, and the competitiveness component that the Indonesian government is trying to encourage as well, which is low-cost electricity to support their manufacturing base. And the reason we think it will result in lower-cost electricity is because as a coal unit gets older, it becomes less efficient, and a less efficient unit means that it costs more to run. So the biggest component for operating a coal-fired power plant is obviously the fuel cost. That typically makes up about 75% of the cost of operating coal-fired power plant. And what happens as the unit becomes more inefficient over time or degrades over time, more fuel is needed to produce the same amount of electricity. So this chart on the right here compares the long-run marginal cost of coal-fired power plants that 20 years and older with coal-fired power plants that are 20 years and younger. And this is based on the operating cost of the Indonesian coal fleet. And as you can see, the cost is significantly higher for those units that are 20 years and older, and that's because, like I said, it becomes less inefficient over time, and therefore more fuel is needed to generate the electricity. But also, crucially, older coal-fired power plants, you need to spend more money in terms of maintaining the performance, and also you tend to need to spend more money in markets where there is air pollution policies. And the reason for that
sorry,
is,
2 minutes left. Please, Robin.
sorry, I'll rush through. Yeah, like I say, you need to spend more money on air pollution control technologies for the simple reason that older units don't tend to have the control technologies which are needed. So just moving on to the study that we did with Rocky Mountain Institute and Sierra Club. The basis of this study, or the objectives of this study, were threefold. Firstly, we wanted to show how much it would cost to replace the global existing coal fleet with what we call hybrid technologies, so wind and solar plus battery storage at a saving for the consumer. And the reason we wanted to do that is because we believe that the economic transition will be principally driven by savings to the consumer, and therefore the competitiveness aspects associated with that. We also wanted to look into how we can accelerate the transition and really dig into the details of what will accelerate the transition. And the main reasons that we wanted to look into that is because a lot of coal-fired power in operation today is principally in operation to support an upstream industry. So in the case of Indonesia, they have a huge mining sector, but also its coal-fired power plants are in operation because there is the jobs component and the tax component. So we wanted to see how we could accelerate the transition by smoothing some of those barriers to shutting down high-cost coal. And what we found was replacing uncompetitive coal with wind or solar PV plus battery storage could lead to a saving of nearly 40 billion today. So 40 billion could be saved by shutting down approximately 40% or 843 gigawatts of coal that cost more to run than building new wind or solar plus battery storage. And we expect those savings to increase over time. And what I would say is I'd draw your attention to China and India and the savings that could amount there. And the reason I'd do that is because the Indonesian coal mining sector relies very heavily on these markets for exporting their coal. And with regards to China, we believe that 43% of the operating coal fleet, or 492 gigawatts, could be replaced with wind and solar plus storage at a saving of $18 billion US. And with regards to Indonesia, we think around 70% or 48 gigawatts of the coal fleet could be replaced with either wind or solar plus storage at a saving of around $2 billion US. And this is clearly going to have implications for the Indonesian mining sector as both China and India look to take advantage of the savings associated with embracing wind and solar compared to coal-fired power. Am I over time? Can I just show one more slide? Is that possible?
Yes, you are over time, but so please go on for the last slide.
Okay, I'll show two more slides if that's okay. So with regards to this report, we came up with a three-part approach to the energy transition. And the three phases that we are looking into or that we believe are important to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy in the context of coal-fired power is firstly refinancing. So a lot of markets are regulated, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, and therefore the incentive to phase down or shut down those coal-fired power plants that cost more to run than alternatives is often limited. Therefore, refinancing, we believe, is going to be a significant component to help fund the transition off coal-fired power. Secondly, and this is crucially important in growth markets like Indonesia, there needs to be a huge amount of reinvestment made to ensure that the coal-fired power that is being shut down is being replaced with a technology that is both cheaper and can service the demand needs and the low profile of the power market that it's operating in. And firstly, we think that there should be finance for the transition, and that is again looking at the just transition components, which is a buzzword that is used a lot these days. And what we mean by the just transition is those workers who will lose their jobs, those communities that rely heavily on either coal mining or coal-fired power, to ensure that they are not left behind as we transition away from coal-fired power.
Okay, Matt, sorry to cut your conversation. I just want to highlight that. Can you just mention one example of how this three approach can be conducted?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just do that quickly now. I'm sorry for going over time. So this is one example of how we believe financial instruments can be used to ease the transition, both in terms of the use of refinancing and then reinvesting in low carbon alternatives, and also using any additional money that is left over for the just transition components. So this scenario here looks at what we call asset portfolio securitization, and that allows PPAs to be modified in a way that creates a win-win situation for the current power plant operator, the consumer of the electricity, and also those individuals and communities that rely on that coal-fired power. And the way that this would be structured is through a special purpose vehicle. So a special purpose vehicle would be created to put the coal-fired power into it to be shut down, and in return, a government or local government institution would issue a bond, and that bond would be would give low cost capital to the power plant owner, and therefore that would allow them to use that money to replace the coal with lower carbon alternatives, like we used in the example in the previous slides, either wind or solar plus battery storage. And what that would lead to is cheaper electricity for the consumer, which is clearly a good thing. But any additional money that is left over from the power plant owner having access to that lower cost capital could also be used for transition assistance, so that some of that leftover money could then go to the individuals that worked at the power plants, or the communities that rely on those power plants, so they are not left behind as those coal plants are shut down and replaced with lower carbon alternatives. So that's just one example. What I would say in the context of this report that we did with Rocky Mountain Institute and Sierra Club is that they are high level by design. So what is essential is that any financial instrument that is developed really reflects the economic and social context of the power markets that they're operating in. And clearly there are some nuances associated with the Indonesian power market, in the sense that it is a growth market. There's still a lot of unmet demand, and it is highly regulated. So there will need to be adjustments made in that regard. Irina, I'll leave it there, given how much time I've taken already.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Actually, you are running out of time, so and I also don't want to make a conversation becomes longer with my questions. So then I will just ask the panelists to give their comments and also their feedbacks based on your skills and your expertise on the presentation that presented before by speakers. So please, Pak Husni first. Pak Husni, you have 10 minutes to give comments on the presentations before.
Terima kasih Mbak Erina. Saya bahasa Indonesia aja ya. Tolong di-translate. Baik.
Ya, baik Pak.
Thank you. Hi Matt, agree. How are you? Baik. Saya mau menyampaikan ini. Bentar
Pak, saya sampaikan dulu. Matt, because Pak Husni will speak in Bahasa, so please look at the chat box. My colleague Egy will help translate, interpret it in the chat box. So, and later on, after Pak Husni speaks, I will just highlight some key points that Pak Husni mentioned before. So please, Egy, help me to translate, and Pak Husni, please to give a comment, Pak.
Okay. Terima kasih Mbak Erina. Jadi saya lebih ini, kalau yang Pak Feby tadi udah menjelaskan ya, bahwa memang kita masih selama ini masih tertarik pada batu bara, karena memang secara realita kita punya sumbernya, ya kan. Jelas bahwa sumber terdekat itu biasanya harga yang paling murah. Dan juga kita masih sedikit tergantung pada fossil fuel. Nggak bisa kita tiba-tiba artinya menggantikan apa yang sudah ada itu dengan energi terbarukan. Karena kalau secara tiba-tiba nanti sistem bisa kolaps. Kenapa? Karena bagaimanapun juga kita pemerintah keberpihakan terhadap renewable energy itu sudah final. Jadi ini terbukti dalam kebijakan energi nasional kita di tahun 2025 itu ada target 23%. Itu yang kita coba kejar gitu kan. Nah, tentu saja untuk mencapai itu ada beberapa yang menjadi ikut mewarnai pencapaian itu, antara lain perkembangan dari renewable itu sendiri. Yang kedua juga masalah harga. Makanya amazing bagi saya tadi yang disampaikan Matthew Gray bahwa US dollar per megawatt hour. Nah ini yang baru bagi saya, megawatt hour. Biasanya teman-teman di renewable energy itu US dollar per megawatt kapasitas. Nah ini megawatt hour. Ini menarik bagi saya gitu. Dia bisa lebih murah dari dari PLTU. Kenapa? Pemerintah sudah mencoba menerbitkan Permen 50 tentang energi baru terbarukan. Cuma itu kan ternyata beberapa stakeholder minta agar itu diubah. Kenapa? Alasannya karena harganya masih terlalu murah bagi mereka gitu loh. 0,85% dari BPP setempat. Biaya pokok penyediaan setempat loh, bukan BPP batubara. Nah itu kan tidak matching dengan apa yang tadi disampaikan gitu. Jadi pada dasarnya pemerintah welcome terhadap renewable energy, tinggal nanti masa transisinya kita lihat sesuai perkembangan, Pak. Jadi kapan kita mencoba tahun 2025 itu 23%. Tetapi tadi udah disinggung dengan adanya dampak COVID-19 itu yang di satu sisi demand-nya menurun jauh, sedang di sisi lain ada pembangkit-pembangkit besar itu yang sudah masuk ke sistem. Tentunya ini juga akan berpengaruh terhadap perencanaan untuk renewable energy. Jadi itu sangat. Terus juga tadi sudah saya sempat sampaikan masalah harga ya. Jadi ternyata di Indonesia tidak serta-merta itu jauh lebih murah dari PLTU. Ini buktinya Permen 50, maka sekarang akan ditarik lagi ke Perpres tentang renewable energy. Saya nggak tahu karena kami tidak ditugaskan untuk mengawal itu. Cuma yang jelas renewable energy itu harapan ke depan. Ini kalau yang kita lihat itu adalah dalam rangka untuk menurunkan BPP, biaya pokok penyediaan, bukan meningkatkan. Oleh karena itu kiat-kiat bagaimana supaya yang intermittent itu tadi dijelaskan, baik itu yang PLTS maupun yang wind itu bisa lebih murah dari PLTU. Kemudian saya juga melihat di chat juga bahwa sampai saat ini kan PLTU memang masih menjadi baseload ya, masih yang paling murah. Nah, bagaimana keberpihakan pemerintah terhadap iklim? Jadi tadi udah disinggung oleh Pak Feby. Jadi kita memang awalnya dari Paris Agreement itu yang menjadi salah satu dasar bagi pemerintah untuk semakin berpihak pada energi bersih ini. Jadi sebenarnya ada kebijakan pemerintah untuk mencapai energi bersih, artinya kebijakan ke depan untuk PLTU yang baru-baru itu harus menerapkan ultra superkritikal atau superkritikal atau subkritikal sesuai kapasitasnya. Jadi itu memang salah satu upaya pemerintah untuk menekan CO2 yang dihasilkan oleh PLTU. Kemudian di sisi lain untuk meningkatkan bauran energi baru terbarukan, untuk PLTU yang sudah ada, pemerintah sekarang sedang menyusun roadmap tentang pemanfaatan co-firing. Ya kan? Jadi co-firing itu dalam rangka meningkatkan energi mix daripada energi terbarukan. Jadi co-firing itu bisa dari pelet-pelet sampah, bisa juga dari wood. Jadi pelet-pelet kayu. Nah, kami ini sedang berkoordinasi dengan Kementerian Pertanian bagaimana untuk mengamankan supply chain-nya. Jadi itu sebenarnya kebijakan dari pemerintah dalam rangka meningkatkan bauran energi di Indonesia. Cuma yang tadi memang menarik ini yang disampaikan Pak Matthew ini. Jadi bagaimana ini benar-benar bisa lebih murah dari PLTU, harganya, sedang di Indonesia sendiri implementasi kita tawarkan ke IPP, itu mereka tidak tertarik ke Permen 50 gitu. Karena alasannya masih terlalu murah katanya. Lah, Padahal di penelitian kan sudah jauh menurun ya. Bahkan kalau di undangannya ISR itu 85%. Oke, cukup itu kali. Terima kasih.
Baik, Pak Husni. Now I would like to ask Pak Arthur to give comments since you are working from the Coal Producers Association. So we would like to get your insights on this coal transition. Please, Pak Arthur, 10 minutes is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Marina. I think based on the two presentations, I can conclude. I think the key message is that the coal transition is happening. The energy transition from fossil to renewable is happening. But the question on everyone's mind, of course, is the pace, whether it can be accelerated or and also some things are developing on a country-specific basis. What's happening in the global context might not be happening region-wise, and specifically we're talking about in the context of Indonesia. I think the emphasis on the coal-fired power plant is still quite dominant. I'm only doing this based on the RUPTL. Of course, I think we are waiting. Everyone is still waiting on PLN and based on the approval from ESDM to get the latest one based on the latest forecast and see what the energy mix will be thrown into based on the revised one. But the one that I can refer to is the one that 2019 to 2028. I think you still see a dominance of coal-fired power plant. For us, I think from APLSI, which is the Association of IPP, most of our members started by becoming the producer or the supply of fossil fuel, starting with oil and gas and mining. But we started realizing that in order to develop the country even further, we need to focus on the domestic economy, and that's why most of the group that are involved in our association are switching to also building power plant. I know it's a long-term investment, but I think you do realize that the return risk profile is there on a long-term basis. And once we set a foothold on becoming a power producer, I think now based on the economics, I think a lot of people are telling us that the renewable energy is becoming more and more enticing and attractive. And I go back to the first point, whether it's happening now or in 10 years. Feby mentioned earlier that it should be accelerated within 10 years, but you do see a trend of the retirement of the old coal-fired power plant. So that I think is in line. And at the same time, the expansion that was supposed to happen in the coal-fired power plant in Java, Bali, which is the bulk of the output capacity, there is also a moratorium on new coal-fired power plants. So I think the government is also being consistent with its commitment to the Paris Agreement, and we as the power producer from the private sector basically follow what the future landscape is given to us. Of course, the economics matter, and I think the regulatory push is there. Pak Husni mentioned that we are from the private sector all very much anticipating the new presidential regulation on the feed-in tariff for renewable, and we think that it will be more economically attractive compared to the previous one, which based on the BPP or the base cost to produce from PLN. So I think that is an issue. I think in terms of the trend, I think the transition is happening, but of course the question is how fast. Now I think the other factor that we need to really consider is the reliability. Of course, everyone's concerned, other than the affordability of the current pricing in terms of fossil fuel, which is still at the moment on the front end is still relatively lower, even though the trend projects itself to be higher than renewables in the coming years. But I think the grid stability is always the big question. How resilient is the the capacity to remain on a constant basis. And I think this is the question when we want to integrate more and more renewable energy into the portfolio and how to rebalance that. You know, I agree with the main objective to reduce our carbon footprint. I think you know, even though in Asia it's happening on a slower basis than say in Europe, but you know, I think everyone can agree on that becoming the common goal. So I think we need to look at the technology that is out there, how in terms of, you know, being able to integrate this and still be able to supply consistently, and you know, I would also add that Indonesia is not a land-based country. You know, the systems itself is not integrated. We always talked about the interconnection between systems, and we even talked about Sumatra and Java being the largest consumer being interconnected, but that's not happening yet. So you have to also add the complexity of Indonesia being an archipelago to be able to reach out to the remote region. I think this is a challenge for everyone. Us from the power producer, I think, is fully supportive of the government to continue to invest in the grid, in the transmission distribution, you know, because that will basically add the amount of consumer base and be able to reach out the electrification even further. So I think, you know, those are some of the issues. How to integrate and rebalance the renewable energy. That will answer the question of how fast can you phase out fossil fuel and, you know, coal-fired. On top of my head, I think there's a lot of things that I look at from, you know, a few discussions and things. I think the digital transformation is happening. You know, I'm looking at some of these smart grids that are available out there, meeting challenges to manage your peak load and stabilize the grid, and you know, just to be able to be flexible. I think that's a key. Some of these digitization I think is very important. I think going forward, because then, you know, you're able to forecast a lot better and more accurately. So yes, I do realize that some of the new coal-fired power plant is much more efficient than the ones that are being retired. So they do consume a lot less coal. And you know, the emission control is also much more stringent now. Most of us are, you know, with PLN are trying to be more compliant to that. You know, low sulfur and some of these materials that are combusted needs to be a lot lower. So the trend for the you know, ultra supercritical, as mentioned, and also cleaner coal power plant is there. So I think the key is actually to integrate both, but I agree that the long-term basis that renewables should become more and more dominant percentage in the output capacity for electrification in Indonesia. I think I'll stop right there on my comment on the very interesting discussion based on everyone's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Matt, I just want to highlight that Pak Husni from MEMR stated that basically the government is open with the renewable energy implementation in Indonesia. That's why now there is ongoing discussion about the co-firing biomass. So now Indonesia's government started to look for the wood pellet as a co-firing or replacing small-scale coal power plant in a remote island. And besides that, there is also a new regulation that coal IPP producer, coal power plant, has to implement the supercritical and also ultra supercritical power plant in Indonesia. So that is government response in addressing climate change issue, and also providing energy at the same time. And from Pak Arthur, I just want to confirm one thing, Pak. You mentioned that you realize that coal industry is starting to have a down industry in the next in one decade or several years in the next several years. But I just want to know from your perspective that what are the response from the coal industry or IPP to prepare renewable energy industry? Is there any effort, Pak, to prepare the renewable energy industry besides a coal power plant?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before that most of our members are actively seeking out opportunities to be involved in developing a renewable power plant. We're looking at a few. Of course, in terms of size, they're different than the ones that are already in most of our holdings. That are mostly still very much focused on coal-fired power plant and mining and fossil based. But I think the willingness and the flexibility to adapt to that is there, and I also think that in terms of the ability to get new loan on renewable is becoming more and more simplistic compared to getting a new loan, especially if you're expanding. I think it's probably still there. Some banks are still willing to provide lending, but if you're trying to build something new, I think it's becoming harder and harder. And we know that coal-fired power plant is very much highly cost intensive in terms of the capital cost compared to the lower marginal cost to produce. And we know that 70% will be coming from some type of financing arrangement. And that type of coal financing now is becoming more and more challenging. As we know, the OECD countries now has also started to refuse financing new coal-fired power plants. So you're looking at quite a selective amount of financial institution that's still willing to extend loan. Whereas if you're starting to get into new renewable, I think you look at a mixture of financing that's available out there. Some commercial and some based on some backing that is available to help you and support you in sizing up your renewable. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but Arthur, do you have specific response to the co-firing regulation that Pak Husin mentioned before?
Not at the moment. I think some of us are also looking at hybrid technology in which your current plant also requires some phasing out for your internal use of power by supplying your own power with the introduction of renewable. So and the ability to be able to supply that to the grid, even though it's probably on a different type of voltage. But I think the idea for us to throw that into the mix is there. So, but I agree that the trend is there. I go back to my first argument in terms of can we agree on how accelerated the pace of change and transition will happen, specifically for Indonesia, because I think it will follow suit on the world mega trend, but I think it will not take a lead in terms of the transition as fast as other countries that's already happening. Even as we hear with other developing countries such as India and China, that's really also making a leap.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Arthur. I'm looking at the Q&A box. There are several answered questions, so I don't think that we need to bring up these questions again. But there is still one question to Mr. Matt Gray. you have questions addressed to you. You can say it on, at the Q&A box. Otherwise, I will read it for you. Matt, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I've answered a number of questions.
But there is one question still in the open. In your opinion, what are the key success factors for renewable energy companies in Indonesia to have financing support from commercial bank? Because we still don't have adequate success story on RE implementation. And number two, what are the key risks that multinational investment banks usually address on financing the renewable energy business?
Yes, sure. So I can answer those ones. So
Okay.
I guess what I would say is that the cost of renewable energy in Indonesia is higher than other parts of the world, and the reason for that is twofold. Firstly, renewable energy in Indonesia is a nascent industry, so it's only just starting to get going. Therefore, the economies of scale haven't been experienced yet, and therefore costs are higher. And the reason for that is because there's been decades of support in places like Europe into renewable energy. But also another reason why costs are higher is the local context is different. So Indonesia is an archipelago, so there's a series of islands. So to what extent it can get renewable energy costs as low as places like Texas, where there is a vast amount of flat and unused land, remains to be seen. Therefore, that those are the two considerations that need to be understood when you're thinking about renewable energy in Indonesia. That said, we do see these deflationary trends occurring throughout all markets in the world, and the reason for that is because we see it as a mega trend that is going to define power generation over the next couple of decades. With regards to the first question, in terms of key success factors, firstly, I think because Indonesia is a highly regulated power market, what needs to happen first is there needs to be clear guidance and support from the Indonesian government, outlining, where the Indonesian government wants to go with regards to its power generation mix between now and 2040, and then clearly outlining transition steps to achieving that long-term goal. That is the first thing that needs to occur, and then I would argue that there needs to be international and multinational finance that can come from commercial banks once there is an established market in renewable energy in Indonesia. So there's a clear path to planning, developing, constructing and operating a renewable energy power plant, which has long been the case in places like Europe and the US, but because Indonesia's power market is still in its nascent stages, it's really not there yet. The second aspect is to what extent development finance can get involved. Institutions like the World Bank, can they support the development of renewable energy, and supporting the development of renewable energy, perhaps supporting all the other positive aspects that go with renewable energy, such as job creation, better air quality, and in the long run, low cost electricity. So that's how I would answer those questions. I hope that helps.
Yes, thanks, Matt. After this, I will We have Pak Surya Dharma here. He is chairperson from Indonesian Renewable Energy Society. He raised his hand, so I will let Pak Dharma to express your concerns and ask your questions live, Pak. Pak Dharma, you can unmute yourself and please, you can speak. Pak Surya Dharma, are you still there? No. Pak Surya Dharma? Ganda, host ya? Bisa unmute Pak Surya nggak, Gan? Siapa yang bisa nge-unmute?
Ditunggu sebentar, saya sudah aktifkan ke Pak Surya Dharma, boleh bisa mengaktifkan mikrofonnya sekarang.
While waiting for Pak Surya, Erina, while waiting for Pak Surya, can I just give a quick answer to Pak Husni?
Okay, please.
Pak Husni, tadi berkaitan dengan Permen 50 ya, karena yang dibilang bahwa pemerintah sudah mengeluarkan itu dan itu dikeluarkan tahun 2017. Intinya adalah keekonomian renewable kita sekarang kan belum kompetitif ya, seperti di negara lain. Ya, seperti di negara lain dan sebenarnya di dalam presentasinya Matthew di halaman 6 kalau tidak salah itu melihat tren untuk declining cost renewable gitu. Nah, ketika 2017 kemarin itu dikeluarkan, memang untuk konteks Indonesia belum terlalu kompetitif seperti itu. Ya, jadi konteksnya adalah memaksakan renewable untuk bersaing dengan fosil, dengan BPP, BPP-nya PLN yang kita tahu itu tidak hanya pembangkit listrik yang fosil fuel, tapi juga usia pembangkitnya juga banyak yang sudah sunk cost gitu ya. Itu juga membuat renewable jadi nggak bisa bersaing. Tapi kalau kita lihat tren ke depan kan harganya harusnya semakin murah dan beberapa proyek yang baru misalnya yang desain oleh PLN floating solar yang di Cirata itu bisa 5,8 sen per kWh dan kita tahu 5,8 sen per kWh untuk solar floating itu mungkin lebih murah ya daripada harga PLTU sekarang gitu atau sama dengan harga PLTU sekarang. Jadi kita bisa bayangkan kalau semakin banyak mungkin proyek-proyek serupa dengan size yang cukup besar, harganya akan semakin kompetitif dan kalau kita ikuti tren global tadi seperti yang disampaikan oleh Matt, 2028 itu harusnya renewable plus storage, solar plus storage itu lebih murah daripada PLTU batubara dan menurut saya ini sekarang kita dalam satu situasi di mana kita harus menentukan arah atau perencanaan ketenaga listrikan kita 10 tahun mendatang dengan mengantisipasi bahwa di sebelum 2030 sebagian besar dari PLTU yang sekarang beroperasi dan yang sedang dibangun itu tidak lagi kompetitif. Nah, yang jadi pertanyaan adalah apakah kita akan terus untuk membangun PLTU dalam 10 tahun ke depan atau kita mau merevisit gitu ya perencanaan kita untuk melihat apakah asumsi-asumsi yang dipakai masih valid atau tidak di dalam menetapkan rencana pengembangan ketenaga listrikan untuk 10 tahun ke depan. Mungkin itu sedikit dari saya dan ini ada Pak Surya Dharma mungkin sudah siap ya untuk bicara. Silakan Pak Surya.
Iya, Pak. Makasih Pak Febi kesempatannya. Saya kira ini memang sangat menarik ya kalau kita bicara soal call transisi ya. Bagi kami melihat sebetulnya begini, apa yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah kita selama ini kan lebih banyak itu tidak konsisten gitu ya, karena tidak konsisten terhadap kebijakan yang dikeluarkan sendiri. Akhirnya yang terlihat misalnya tadi juga kami baru diskusi bahwa coal sekarang kan porsinya sudah 63% di dalam bauran energi atau bauran listrik secara nasional gitu. Yang seharusnya kan tidak sebesar itu. Nah, kalau kita lihat sekarang harus diistirahatkan beberapa pembangkit, memang akan terjadi relaktansi yang besar juga dari kalangan pembangkit dari PLTU, walaupun ini sudah dilakukan oleh pemerintah. Kami baru minggu yang lalu kami diskusi juga dengan beberapa pengusaha untuk batu bara. Mereka mengatakan ini kok energi terbarukan ingin menyingkirkan batu bara gitu. Nah ini ya, saya katakan sebetulnya kita tidak pernah menyingkirkan batu bara, tetapi kita ingin memanfaatkan porsi energi terbarukan yang dicanangkan oleh undang-undang yang disebutkan dalam peraturan perundang-undangan yang berlaku bahwa energi terbarukan itu dari 23% tahun 2023. Nah, ketika kemudian sekarang terjadi miss, misalnya ada yang satu over, ada yang berkurang, mestinya memang harus dengan sukarela diberikan kesempatan untuk diistirahatkan kalau memang sudah terlalu tua. Dan kita pun tidak minta semua berhenti secara total. Tetapi pembangkit-pembangkit yang kita anggap yang kecil-kecil, sudah tua, tidak efisien dan sebagainya, itu diistirahatkan. Ini akan terjadi memang diskusi yang sangat panjang antara kelihatannya antara pengusaha PLTU, pengusaha batubara, karena itu pasti akan mengancam ya kehidupan. Bahkan barusan juga saya hadir di acara anak-anak ITB itu, anak-anak ITB mengatakan ini kenapa menyingkirkan energi fosil, Pak? Nah ini kan berarti ada sesuatu paradigma yang keliru sebetulnya yang dimunculkan. Padahal tidak pernah kita singkirkan. Yang kita lakukan adalah menuju kepada transisi secara perlahan-lahan sebetulnya meningkatkan pemanfaatan energi terbarukan. Sementara energi lain pun sebetulnya dia akan menyesuaikan. Kalau minyak bahwa itu akan berkurang itu disebabkan karena produksi minyak memang berkurang. Itu kira-kira secara umum. Tetapi bagaimana harus kita sosialisasikan ini supaya tepat sehingga tidak ada yang pihak yang merasa bahwa ada yang tersingkirkan, kemudian ada yang tertampung. Nah, kami sebetulnya dari METI itu berupaya untuk memunculkan sebuah payung hukum yang kita sebut dengan Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. Dengan Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard itu, mereka-mereka yang sekarang memang bergerak di bidang coal juga diberikan kesempatan untuk bisa memanfaatkan kesempatan untuk mengembangkan energi terbarukan dengan jumlah tertentu tentunya. Tapi memang sekarang belum ada legal aspek dari sisi hukumnya, belum ada. Nah, harapan kami kalau nanti undang-undang energi terbarukan dilahirkan, ini akan menampung aspirasi-aspirasi semacam ini. Di sana kita sebut dengan standar portofolio energi terbarukan. Nah, kalaupun misalnya para pengusaha batu bara nanti tidak berkenan karena mereka lebih fokus kepada energi fosil, kepada energi batu bara, mereka bisa menggantinya dengan membeli sertifikat energi terbarukan yang dibangun oleh pihak lain. Sehingga ada win-win solution sebetulnya yang kita tawarkan kepada berbagai pihak. Jadi tidak ada yang merasa disingkirkan, tidak ada yang merasa diuntungkan. Mungkin itu tambahan dari saya terhadap diskusi kita hari ini. Saya memang tidak ikut secara penuh tadi, tetapi mungkin itu yang bisa saya tambahkan. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you Pak Surya for for the insightful analysis. It's great to know also about the renewable energy portfolio standard. So coal industry may take a role in formulating this renewable energy portfolio standard. And now we are running out of time of our webinar. Sorry for the participants who would like to raise a hand and speak their concerns lively. Sorry, we cannot do that. And now I will let each speakers and panelists to have a conclusion statement.
Boleh sedikit, Mbak Erina.
Oh iya, iya Pak. Saya mau mempersilahkan setiap speaker dan panelis untuk memberikan kalimat penutup. Setelah itu saya akan menutupnya. Pak Rusdi mau duluan memberikan kalimat penutup. Setelah itu saya akan menyerahkan kepada Pak Arthur. Kemudian speakernya sekarang gantian, speakernya belakangan. Pak Rusdi silakan memberikan kalimat penutup.
Baik, terima kasih pada ISR yang telah memfasilitasi acara ini dan pemerintah ikut di dalamnya sebagai presiden wakil pemerintah sebagai panelis. Jadi bagaimanapun juga ini menunjukkan wujud keberpihakan pemerintah terhadap energi bersih. Jadi pemerintah berdiri di atas semua pihak, bukan berarti ketika kita mengembangkan energi bersih bukan berarti PLTU disingkirkan, tidak. Jadi kita lebih pada masalah realistis karena banyak yang dipikirkan oleh pemerintah antara lain resource-nya, kemudian capability to pay daripada masyarakat gitu kan. Itu yang jadi semua jadi pertimbangan bagi pemerintah. Tadi Pak Feby juga mengakui bahwa tentu saja harga yang murah itu tidak serta-merta di Indonesia. Cuma pemerintah dengan menerbitkan CAN untuk jangka panjang baik RKM maupun RPTL itu menunjukkan bahwa dalam jangka 10 tahun itu pemerintah sudah memikirkan bagaimana transisi dari batu bara menuju ke renewable energy. Nah, tinggal nanti mungkin realisasinya kita juga menunggu progres daripada perkembangan IBT itu sendiri di Indonesia seperti apa. Baik itu tarif, kemudian pembangunannya. Kenapa? Karena banyak renewable energy itu tidak konservasi alam sehingga sulit dari aspek teknis maupun perizinan. Mungkin itu, jadi pemerintah tetap selalu mendukung Mbak Erina. Mudah-mudahan nanti energi bersih ini akan semakin berkembang di Indonesia, tentu saja dilandasi oleh kemampuan bayar dari masyarakat. Mungkin cukup itu Mbak Erina. Terima kasih.
Baik Pak Husni, saya translate dulu. Oh udah, Janata Giwaka sudah mentranslate. Ya udah, silakan Pak Arthur, ada kalimat penutup.
Yeah, I think the key message here is the pace of transition, specifically within the Indonesian context. From the private power producer, we look at this as an opportunity to rebalance our portfolio. And, the ability of financing is also there. And we are keen on the future landscape of the government also realigning itself and presenting opportunities to us to participate even further. And I know this new president regulation, I think, will kind of address some of these challenges that have also been socialized quite heavily to us from the private sector. And, we look at it as an opportunity for growth. Of course, for us, we look at it differently because it's also, the economics really play into factor, whether it's 100% phase out or not. I think it's not to compete with our existing coal power plant, but I think it's more to rebalance and how to reintegrate that into our system. So I think that's the key message. I think that, from us, from the power producer, to participate with the transition.
Thank you, Pak, for your participation. Your participation here in this webinar is also one of the high respect from coal producer for the coal transition issue. And now I will let Matthew or Fabi to have a conclusion remarks.
I'm happy to go first.
Matthew first, please.
Yeah, sure. I will speak very briefly, given I overspoke during my PowerPoint presentation. But I guess I'll just make three quick points. The first is what's happened with the COVID crisis. Evidence suggests it's going to accelerate the electricity transition, and therefore there is a big opportunity for society and for places like Indonesia to leapfrog the transition from high carbon technologies to lower carbon technologies in a way that is quicker and cheaper, and that is going to come with a lot of opportunities in terms of job growth, cleaner air, but there will also be significant challenges. And I think for places like Indonesia, which rely heavily on coal mining, working together collaboratively with the commercial sector, civil society, and the international community will be vital in terms of accessing low-cost finance, ensuring the transition doesn't leave behind those individuals and communities that rely very heavily on coal mining and, in instances, coal-fired power generation. So that's the two main points. What I would say, just as a final point, coal is losing its economic footing. We believe that the transition will happen a lot quicker than many expect, and that will principally be due to economic rationale rather than this need to meet the temperature goal in the Paris Agreement. And the reason we think that is because of the trends that we're seeing throughout the rest of the world. And I think those countries and those companies and investors who don't believe that potentially open themselves to significant stranded asset risk. And therefore we would urge all companies, governments, and investors to plan for that transition, so it is an orderly transition. Thank you.
Fadli? Fadli, kalimat penutup?
Yes, sorry, I just got a cut. Well, I have a few points to make. First, I think this is about looking at the future. Forecast what happened in the future with especially the future of power system in Indonesia, as renewables now provide the opportunities that we can have cost competitive electricity in the future. I think it is against all the conventional wisdom that renewable is expensive and unreliable. I think a number of studies has shown that we can have a competitive system because of renewable getting cheaper, storage getting cheaper. And I think that's a new trend that has to be that overlooked so far with from the policies and planning perspective in Indonesia. Of course, we have to consider the geography of Indonesia. Indonesia is an island country, so there's a different also economics. But overall, I think in the major system, some studies shows that renewable will be competitive. Therefore, the government needs to revisit the electricity plan, looking at these new realities and address this issue. I think it is about the question how we are going to act. I think now we are in the crossroad, coal industry in the crossroad, and addressing energy transition is not easy. It shouldn't be. It's not in the short period. It's a long period, but need to start now. And there is an economic consequences if we fail to address this. The study by CTI in 2018, I think, indicate that the potential of stranded asset of Indonesian power sectors from this 73% of power capacity not competitive by 2030 is around $35 billion. And if that happens, then it will be the cost that bear by the utilities and also the consumers as well as the government. I think we shouldn't let that happen, and therefore revisit our electricity plan is very, very important. And ISR recommend to start to study for the government to study the energy transition, looking at the strategy as well as the impact, so we may have a just energy transition. I think it's not only the power sectors that will be hit badly with this, but also the coal sectors also will be affected. Therefore, addressing social economic issue related to the existing coal sectors that we know play important role in some subnational, it's also very important. So it's a long way to go, but we have to start very, very soon, looking all the possibility, and it is the journey that we should take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Pak Fabi. Thank you, Pak Husni. Thank you, Pak Arthur. Basically, we as an independent think tank are supported a government to do energy transition, specifically in coal transition. So that's why we make this webinar to make the coal transition issue is going on. And according to Pak Fabi, so please government revisit and also integrate just energy transition in Indonesia's electricity plan, energy plan, and also development plan to have a just coal transition. Okay, now it's already 3:30. Sorry, it's half an hour more than our plan. So now I want to close this webinar, and I would like also to say thank you very much to the participants. You can also see the results of the polling that we had before in the links that my colleague Ganda has distributed before in the chat box. And now with this, I want to close this webinar. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Fabi. Thank you, Pak Husni. Thank you, Pak Arthur. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih, Pak Husni.
Terima
Pak
kasih.
Arthur. Thank you, Matt.
Sama-sama, Pak Febi, Erina. Thank you,
Thank
Matt.
you, everyone.
Thank you, Pak Surya.
Pak
Terima kasih.